Hey, Wally. Glad you're able to make it. So we'll start in just a few minutes, maybe less than that, because I see it's almost 6 o'clock. So, so this has been a lot of fun, kind of trying to organize, put together. Um, this is actually my second live stream, and it's been kind of the first one didn't go so well, but it's that learning curve of how do we make things happen. So let's see. So let's go ahead and do that. So there we go. Well, hello everybody. So I want to welcome you to Arizona virtual Arizona Pride. I'm so happy that we're able to do this and bring together so much of our community as we get a chance to learn about each other and just come together, even in this time of not being social, which I know for some of us is quite difficult. I mean, that's why things like this online, I think, are so important, because it really allows us to come together and celebrate each other. I mean, I have to say, one of the things that's been really cool is I've actually been watching with my friend Andrew and the T Phoenix. We've done a couple movie nights through Netflix Play and Netflix Party. And so it's been really fun kind of being in this crowd and being able to share things with different generations. And I'm really kind of enjoying that intergenerational thing that's really kind of happening right now. So I think that's really cool. And I just love the whole virtual aspect that we're now building community in a different way than we were 3 weeks ago. So let's see if I can. Let's see. Okay, so let's try that. I have a feeling we're going to wind up doing that. So that way, so as we go along, please comment. Let me know if you have questions. And also, one of the things I'm looking at doing is setting up virtual LGBTQ panels for the future so that we can start talking about a variety of issues and things like that in terms of our history, because pretty much to me, everything is history. So what kind of conversation would you like to see happening? So there'll be a chance. I mean, please let me know. If not in this format, there's always email, messenger, phone, all kinds of ways to get a hold of me and other folks involved with history. So my name is Marshall Shore. I am also known as the Hip Historian. Now you might wonder, how does one get a name like the Hip Historian? Well, actually, a little over 20 years ago, I was working in a library in Brooklyn, and guess what? It was bitter cold and ready for a change. So my partner and I, Paul, so in October, it will be 27 years. And so we decided to load everything we own into a big orange cube, a U-Haul, which had their international world headquarters right here in Arizona, which I think is really cool, and decided it was time to move to someplace sunny. And that was right here in Phoenix. And so, I'm always impressed by just where everybody has come from. So, let me know how long you've been here. I mean, I've been here 20 years, actually, as of New Year's. It was 20 years. So, and I love that I'm now meeting more and more folks that are born here and are choosing to stay here instead of just kind of fleeing away and making this a better place. So as soon as I got here, all I kept hearing about how there was no history here. But I knew that wasn't true, because every time I went somewhere, I came face to face with so many amazing stories. You also have all those GIs that either were stationed here, trained here, or passed on their way to somewhere else. And they were moving here in huge numbers. Oh, Wally, I didn't realize you were from Albuquerque. I love Albuquerque. Oh my gosh, all those neon signs. But that's a whole other passion. So as well as then here we have the inventor of air conditioning. So, you know, we need to give him rounds of applause because so many of us would not be here smiling without Dr. Carrier and his fabulous invention. As well as Phoenix New Times has named me the best historian several years running, as well as even Phoenix Magazine named me the best bespectacled Phoenix celebrity because I do love my eyewear. Now, I became the hip historian back actually in 2012. I actually started doing this about 2009, but we had a great celebration for ourselves here in Arizona for 100 years of statehood. And they gave me 15 minutes to talk about anything I wanted to on February 14th at the state capitol. And I chose to talk about one of my favorite events that's called Mask of the Yellow Moon. Now, it was started back in 1926 by Charlotte Hall. Now, if any of you ever go up to Prescott, you can actually visit her house, which has now been turned into a museum. It was first held at the Elzareba Shriners Temple, which is still standing over by the Capitol, down on Washington and 15th Avenue. It later became the Mining and Mineral Museum, a fun little quirky museum that sadly got kicked out, but they're going to be moving in once they get the building back up to code. Now, the legend of the Mask of the Yellow Moon was about how the god of sun would give his rays to make the earth golden and warm and make things grow. So it was always a springtime event. Then it got bigger. It then moved over to Montgomery Stadium, which was our first stadium right here in Arizona. And, you know, it was home to our very first bowl game. And it plays right into Arizona agricultural past. It was called the Salad Bowl. I sure wish somebody would bring that back because that's a bowl game I could probably sink my teeth into. Now, at the Salad Bowl, what would you expect? Why, none other than the queen of the Salad Bowl, writing in her very own salad bowl, even with her spoon and fork. Now, it was woven with the curriculum. So at its height, it ran till 1955. At its height, it had about 8,000 high school and college students performing. It was one of those events that was touted right up there with Mardi Gras as something that everybody should come and see. It was woven through the curriculum, so all the students got involved. I mean, here's a photo of a debate club doing a skit. You also had multiple marching bands because pretty much every high school was involved. Now, they also had really cool sets. Now, Glenn actually just recently passed away in his early 90s. And he told me this story about how when he was in high school, him and his friends would go steal a bit of that set, drag it to his backyard, actually into his carriage house. And they would put on plays throughout the rest of the year in front of that bit of cabbage set. It was also known for dance and amazing costumes, all designed by home ec, actually designed by students and made by home ec. And I was lucky enough to find a few dresses in a box. And so I was allowed to borrow these for 24 hours. And so there we are. I had some lovely friends step in as models to show off these amazing dresses. These are from the 30s. And in the process, someone was trying to describe me to someone who didn't know who I was. And they were confusing me with Marshall Trimble, the official state historian. And someone said, oh, you know, he's the hip historian. And so I borrowed that and ran with it. Now, Glenn was just an amazing warehouse of stories, hopefully photos. So when he was a young man, he had a gentleman friend over visiting him when his dad walked in on them in a very compromising position. And so he was then kicked out of his house. And at that point, he was working at the Encanto Park. He was working in the boathouse. And they said, sure, Glenn, you can actually have that small corner to sleep in. So for a short period of time, he actually lived in Encanto Park. Now, Encanto Park is known for these islands in the lagoon. And one of them had all this bamboo. So one day he took his machete out there and made a little path and a clearing so that way him and his friends could take a boat over to the island, go into that clearing, and have radio parties. And I'm sure everyone had a good time. So let's talk about LGBTQ history. So I am the project manager for the Arizona LGBT Plus History Project. That is a collaboration between ASU libraries, myself, and Phoenix Pride. As we look to collect more and document and make accessible that portion of our history, because there's so little of it around. And so trying to capture as much as we can. I know Nancy from ASU Libraries is going to be doing a program tomorrow morning at 10. So that should be really good. If you do want to reach out to me at any point, you can do hello@hiphistorian.com. I also suggest you like Arizona Gay History on Facebook. I keep sharing things out there, especially right now. There's been several panels that have been nationally talking about LGBT history. And so I've been posting those there as well. So really, when you talk about the birth of the modern gay rights movement, you're looking at 1969. And that was the year Stonewall. This is actually what Stonewall looked like before it became that famous bar as it looks today. Now, one of the things I love is that back in 2016, it actually became a national monument, the first national monument to the LGBT community. And so happy that there's that documentation as well as that recognition for that event for multiple nights that really spawned the birth of the modern gay civil rights movement. Now, here in Arizona, you had, back in 1976, down in Tucson, Richard Hinken was beaten, and that caused Tucson to look at itself. They put out their first pride, as well as they then became one of the first cities in the country to have an anti-discrimination clause. You've got last year, the history of Two-Spirit, which is a fairly relatively new term within the last decade, but really talking about something that's been around for centuries. And it really is talking about our Native peoples and how some members of their community were allowed to live in both genders. And with that, they were also given tasks that were outside of their birth gender, whether it was naming a child. And so they really were treasured for their different abilities of being in beyond just two genders. And last year, they held the first Two-Spirit powwow down at South Mountain Community College. They had one earlier this year as well. Now, when you really talk about kind of the recent change, probably the biggest thing would be gay marriage. Now, we know it became legal back in 2014 right here in Arizona. Now, how many of you are married? How many of you want to get married? Have the big ceremony and everything else? Let me know. I would like to know. But you know, even before you could legally get married, Bisbee, that town in the South, was doing civil unions before it was even legal. And they are still very proud of that fact. But you know, back in 1975, right here in Maricopa County, 2 men got a marriage license. And the reason why? Because there was no law against it. Well, if you can imagine what hit the fan after that. Soon after that became House Bill 2024, which prohibits and voids marriages of persons of the same sex. And they tried to get that through. Now, there was a group called the Gay People's Alliance, started calling legislators, started doing hunger strikes as a way to bring awareness to this and what it would do. And, you know, it actually failed. it didn't pass, which I think is pretty amazing for back in the mid 70s. So, in fact, we actually didn't have anything like this on the books until 1996, when it became legal to discriminate with marriage. Now, those items that I showed you were from mainstream press. And that's pretty much all we had to start with. My friend Chuck brought to me at one point, he's like, oh, my mom had these friends growing up that were lesbians, and there was this big article done in the Arizona Republic on them. It should be easy to find. And I couldn't find it. And then he found in his own scrapbook the clipping from the Arizona Republic. Now, one of the things is, even though these two women had a machine shop up in Cave Creek, the article never mentions that they were more than business partners. And so you always had to kind of take whatever the mainstream press said, sometimes with a grain of salt. And so, Stonewall was really happened because folks were tired of being harassed, thrown in jail, the threat of having their names published in the newspaper, outing them, which would have destroyed their families. They would have lost their jobs. But, it wasn't just happening in those big cities like New York, San Francisco, and LA, who actually, when you look at the West Coast, we had smaller riots before, but really Stonewall was the one that the media grabbed onto. But back in 1964, I had a friend tell me that at one point he was walking down Roosevelt and saw a police wagon being filled with folks from a gay coffee house. And so then I went on the hunt and actually found this in the newspaper. That was the mayor congratulating the chief of police for a raid on the 8th-Day Coffee House, where you had 20 plus men who were arrested for drunkenness and indecent acts. Now, when I sent this off to some other colleagues, they said, well, how do you know it's gay? And not only was I going on the word of my friend, but if you look down a little further down, it talks about how this police action rid the city of a thing that would normally belongs in Pershing Square in LA, which was a notorious cruising ground. So one of the things I appreciate about this is was almost sending up a red flag to say, hey, if you don't know about this place, you might want to avoid, or you might want to go. But I know if other folks were to read it, they would have no clue what was really going on. So a lot of our stories, a lot of our history is actually word of mouth. It's that oral history. So not until the mid 70s do we start having gay press by the community for the LGBT community. First was Tucson, followed by here in Phoenix with Pride of Phoenix, as well as Sunday's Child by BJ Budd, who was instrumental with Sunday's Child, but also in the early days of helping Pride and the community form. And AASU has actually been scanning a lot of these to make them accessible. Nancy, I'm sure, will be talking about that tomorrow as well, and where in terms they are of making them accessible. Now, we also did a bar owner panel. We had about 6 bar owners talking about some of the history of the bars. And they came up with a list of about 140 plus bars right here in the Phoenix area since kind of the earliest that we knew about. And we think that's actually about 40 off, because since then we've added more things to the list. But I just thought it was a kind of an impressive list to be able to talk. So let's talk about some of those early bars that were here. And so one of the earliest bars that we know of is Kay Elledge, who opened up on South Central, basically Central and Southern, Kay's Happy Landing Buffet, a little lesbian bar with rickety stairs and a little upstairs room with no air conditioning. I heard it was kind of a hothouse, but it was one of the early places where the lesbian community could go and enjoy time with each other, enjoy a beer. Now, the story of Kay, so also her girlfriend was Violet. And so Violet's husband was killed in the war. And it's talked about how they actually used the insurance money from that to then open up the bar. Sadly, none of those buildings still stand, but this is a photo of Dot Wilkinson. Dot Wilkinson is still considered by many to be the foremost women's athlete in Arizona. She is in the Bowling Hall of Fame as well as in the baseball or in the softball hall of in the Women's Softball Hall of Fame. And she was talking about how they were such celebrities that as lesbians, they weren't allowed to go to places like Kay's Happy Landing. They had to have dugout parties or clubhouse parties. And so that's why if you read about any of the softball players, a lot of times they wound up dating other softball players because that was really the only community they were kind of allowed to run in. And here she is. She is in her early 90s, still in South Phoenix, not far from where she grew up. And she is still quite active. Now, along Roosevelt, there was a bar that opened up in the late 30s called Roy's Buffet. Now, softball was not even just important to women, but they also had softball teams for men. And I love that Roy's Buffet sponsored the Lettuce Kings. Now, Roy's Buffet soon became Hubbard's 307 because the address was 307 Roosevelt. Now, you can also see how language has changed over time because this place had fiberglass tablecloths, fancy, gay, and friendly. Now, it may have been gay in the very happy sense. It was also very likely gay because of its location right on Roosevelt, which we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, the 307 became an iconic drag bar in the 70s. That was after they had actually moved to 222 East Roosevelt. But they still kept the name 307. And even though they were forced to move because of the fire, they kept those elongated numbers as kind of their symbol throughout different ads throughout the years until they closed late 90s, early 2000. And it's actually the place where you have folks like Pussy LaHoot did drag there, as well as Miss Ebony. And a whole host of other queens that are still running around performing right here. Now, this is what the building looked like just before it was torn down. Now, interesting enough, so this is the apartment building that went up in its place. Now, let's see. Where the 307 was, there is now a plaque that really talks about how it was an early safe space for the LGBT community from the 50s to really the 2000s. And so that plaque is visible for everyone to see when they walk by. Now, one of the things I also love about this, let's see. Oh, and there we are. And those are actually the original numbers from the 307 that Phoenix Pride owns. And actually, let's go back. So if you see, oh, I should get a new picture because it looks nothing like that now. There's the little building where it says MON, Mon. So that's the Mon Orchid building. The little piece of the building next to it is a restaurant called the Dressing Room. The reason why it's called the Dressing Room is because the 307 was such a small bar that they didn't have a dressing room for the queens to get dressed in. So they would get dressed in the dressing room, have to burst through the alley, running in the side door and performing. And so what I love about this restaurant is it really is trying to keep that history alive. And so much so that they have installed about a 25-foot tall dress form with about 10,000 lights in the alley. And we have named it Tish for Tish Tanner, who was a well-known drag queen who performed a lot at the 307 and has a lot of stories around town. Now, Roosevelt was kind of part of an area that was called the Fruit Loop. From about the mid 40s to like the mid 90s, that area really between Portland and Roosevelt with connecting streets was a loop that was known as the Fruit Loop, the Circuit, a variety of names, but it pretty much was a place where you could go and a gentleman could find another gentleman for 15 minutes of a good time. I know the 307 was great. I love the community that it built and was always, whenever you walked in, people just said hello to you. And so that's why if you're going down Central at Portland, because of Roosevelt Road being kind of the hub of our gay community back in the early days, that's one of the reasons why there is a rainbow crosswalk right there as well. Now, Tucson also has rainbow crosswalk. I don't think any other city in Arizona has a rainbow crosswalk. If you know of any, please let me know. Would love to find out. So when we talk about the history, one of the original gay activists was Harry Hay. So Harry Hay was founder of the Mattachine Society, which was one of the earliest gay civil rights groups for LGBT rights. He also started a group called the Radical Fairies. Now, they had their very first organized meeting right here in Arizona at a little ashram just outside of Benson that still stands around. Yes, there is. Yep, there is indeed another one in Melrose. Rainbow Crosswalk, that is. Now, when we talk about places, you never know where kind of the next bit of the story is going to come from. It's like here we have a Dairy Queen. And originally, this was a Polynesian Dairy Queen opened up in Scottsdale. That has now been kind of hacked up and relocated, soon to open up as another business. But when there was lots of angst over this building very possibly being demolished, I started digging into it and found out that it was designed by Jimmy Salter, who was an architect for Haver and Nunn. Now, he was, for the time period, a very out-proud gay man. I mean, he was so racy that he didn't wear socks to work, drove a little sports car, and was kind of always out there, as well as being very out for the time period as well. He also designed other buildings such as the Seneca Capri, as well as the Kon-Tiki, that building oh so tiki, that sadly no longer stands as well. Now, he had this party trick that he would hang off at a party, he would hang off of someone's balcony and would then pull himself back up to accolades from everybody. That is until he did that trick one time and that didn't happen. And he plummeted, sadly. Would love to have seen what other buildings he would have built. And then, you know, it's like Lalo Guerrera, the father of Chicano music down in Tucson. I know Steve Farley did one of his town murals of Lalo. So everybody who drives around Tucson has seen Lalo, but may not know who he is. But, you know, his son, Dan, who now resides in LA, just self-produced he wrote a play about himself and just self-produced a movie called Gaytino that really talks about what it was like growing up with celebrity father, being a young gay man in Tucson, relocating then to LA. They just had a showing of it up at the Sedona Film Festival, which was amazing. And I know they also had a premiere in Tucson. It is yet to show here in Phoenix. And I've often wondered why, because I think it would really be cool to have that. So actually, let me take, before we launch into questions, let's see, what do we do here? Okay, so, okay, so One of the other things, so last year at Bisbee Pride, we unveiled this, which is our timeline of trans history for Arizona, which at first I didn't know what we would find. And, you know, I was so surprised at all the stuff we found going back to 1899 and Pearl Hart, who is the only stagecoach robber who was a woman. And she spent a lot of her life dressed as a man. So because it's in that time period where we can't really say folks are trans, it was more just that gender pioneer. And so I'm happy to say also, several years ago, I found out about a person named Nikolai Duralin. Then actually, oh, there we go. There's Nikolai. And so Nikolai was born in Russia. I know. See? Yes, exactly. Thank you, Jay. I'm glad somebody. So we did this Arizona Historical Society and did a history lab with them that they unveiled in Bisbee. And it is such a treasure trove. And it was such a joy to put together. Worked with a committee of folks across the valley in the trans community to really to put this together and to help find things out. And so Nikolai, this young Russian man, moved to Chicago, gets a fairly good government job, gets himself married. But, you know, Nikolai is too amorous chorus girls. And so wife number one divorces him. He marries wife number two, who was a chorus girl. Now, in the course of all this, he winds up contracting tuberculosis. And so, like so many people back in the day, they moved to Arizona for our clean air, for his health. And it didn't go well for him. And he wound up passing away in 1906. And when they're ready for burial, they discovered that Nikolai was a woman. And so with Nikolai, his will basically gave all the money to his wife. It actually said his wife. And so the court said, well, you know, because you are a woman, you couldn't be married to a woman. So all his money went to his mother, who was estranged from. So he's buried right here in Phoenix. When they buried him in 1906, they buried him in a dress because of his birth gender and without a headstone. So I'm happy to say there is now a headstone in Greenwood Cemetery to Nikolai Duralin. And so happy we're able to put that together. Now, you know, we did this through the... Oh, I didn't mean to do that and bump. I don't know what you all heard, but it didn't sound pleasant on this side. So actually, I can just do this. So, you know, this was made possible by some great support of the Arizona Historical Society, Trans Spectrum of Arizona, as well as the Lois Lowry Transgendered Archives, as well as Whole World View gave money for this as well, and were able to support it, as well as the Digital Transgender Archives. Oh, that's a really bad angle. I'm going to change that because that's not pleasant to look at. So there is just so much history that we discovered. It's like when you take a look at this, you've got in 1921, there was a young man in Globe, Arizona that was discovered wearing a wig, makeup, and a dress. And he was put in jail. Back in 1910, you had Clyde Hastings, who was a criminal who was able to slip away from folks because he would dress in drag. And indeed, James, there were lots of anonymous donors that gave a lot of time and energy to make this come to fruition. And it's been traveling around a little bit. It was supposed to go to Yuma Pride, which didn't happen. So if you would like to host this at an organizational meeting, please, if you have a business where you'd like to host this transgender timeline, it's 6 panels, 3 panels that are hinged, so it doesn't take up much space, but it really shares so much history that people just aren't aware of. I mean, you've got a young man, actually a middle-aged man in his 50s who was visiting from Ohio, somehow wound up in Yuma being dressed in full drag and was hauled to jail and said either leave town immediately or be arrested and spend time in jail. So he left town. So, you know, we have so much history here. And part of the reason for doing this is that to engage folks, because we know there's more stories out there, because this timeline, actually, I've got a friend from Tucson who was talking about in like 1916, his grandmother had taken this kind of kid who had been bullied in the neighborhood, took him under her wing. And at one point it came out that he wanted to wear grandma's dresses, so they let him. And so he said there's somewhere a family photo of them making tamales with this young man dressed in grandma's dress. So I'm looking so forward to getting that. You also have the fact that my friend Andrew is putting together panels on Insight, the Transgender Experience, which they did their first one, which was really phenomenal, down at the Southwest Center. And so looking for more things like that. So let's see if, I don't want to do that. Let's see if we do this. What happens there? All right, so do you have any questions? Are there any stories you'd like to share or comments? Oh, and actually, you know, I can do something really cool, Andrew. I just learned. Look, there. So that way people can see, there's my friend Andrew, one of the organizers of Insight, the Transgender Experience, which I know they Facebook Live that first one, and so looking to forward to seeing what else they're going to do. And I actually lived there, and I didn't know quite how to take it off of there. So, you know, it's like when you start looking, has anyone ever seen any of those muscle magazines from the 50s? Well, the artist, there was an art director, his name was George Quaintance. He was East Coast born, a dancer, and then had an accident, so he no longer could dance, but he still had an eye for how the body worked. And so he did things like just starting to draw people. In fact, he actually became famous as a hair designer. He would travel around with a team, and they would work with Hollywood celebrities, and he would draw their hair, what it should look like, and his team would then make their hair look like that. And he moved to Arizona in the early 50s. And he also he was a graphic artist and did a lot of girly magazines in the early days. And he then started this penchant for painting half-naked cowboys out on his ranch. And so he did a lot of those paintings. And some of them wound up on the covers of some of the magazines because he wound up being the art director for many of those magazines. And a couple of years ago, there was a gallery that in LA, Toshin, an art publisher, that produced a book because they came across 25 or more paintings of his, and it was the first time they had ever been on public display. So it was really great to be able to go and see these things that I only seen the size of a sheet of paper, and realizing that some of those were almost life size. Now, he was doing this at a time when his art really went from him to collectors was never put on display. And he did just enough to avoid being arrested like some of his other art friends who were sending nudes through the mail, which was deemed illegal. And so he actually wound up passing away in 57. And so, but his art still lives. Actually, the house that he painted in is still just down the street, which is kind of cool and doesn't have a plaque on it yet. So always looking for sponsorship to be able to put a plaque on something. Would love to see a plaque go, or some sort of recognition going off to that ashram where Harry Hay had his first organized meeting. And then, so one of the things that's like working with ASU as well as U of A with the Arizona Queer Archives, you also have the Tempe History Museum they have a collection of oral histories of gay Tempeans. And so there are all these gems around the state. And so just trying to create connection between all of them as a way that we can remember that past and learn from it. So there's so many amazing stories, and I hope that you will please continue to share stories. Also, if you can think of any panels that you would like to see, we can do that. I mean, I've got this fancy new software thing that's doing all of this, that's making all of this accessible. So we can easily do this and then record those for posterity. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Because I can easily just ramble. I mean, I could easily just put up more of the panels and we can go through those as well. Which I'm not adverse to doing either. So, I mean, did you realize that back in 1949, to prevent illegal activities, misconduct, or immorality in liquor selling establishments, the Arizona Department of Liquor Licenses and Control requires known criminals, gangsters, racketeers, pickpockets, swindlers, confidence men, prostitutes, and female impersonators to be barred from said premises. And that was, at that point, how everything happened. And so trying to get more and more of those stories, we've talked about having a history happy hour, bringing folks together and letting them share some of those stories, especially when, like, what we really learned with the bar panel was that it really helps to have someone to kind of bounce things off of, because one person remembers something or one person corrects something. And Mark, I actually don't know if I've been trying to find out if any of those laws were or are still in the books, or were they actually even on the books? That seems to be even the question of where they're actually, was it more just we're doing this, not even an actual law, but just hatred. And so, yeah, so I mean, it's like, I would love to do a history happy hour, maybe doing, I mean, because I know we didn't get as many bar panel or bar owners as we wanted to. So I've really been wanting to do that again and include some of, like, you had Cruisin' Central right around the corner from the 307. And so getting people together to start sharing our history. And the beauty of this is that this is all being recorded. So this is supposedly going to my Hip Historian YouTube channel. It's the first thing that I'm recording like this, so we will see if it goes there. And so I love the fact that we can do this. It automatically documents it. So that way, for future generations, they can look back and learn about the history. And so that's really one of the reasons. It's like we've been wanting to do a history happy hour. And so I think now it makes more sense to do it virtual, because now we can get people from across the state or the country who no longer even live here anymore to share their stories of what it was like. I mean, I recently had someone talking about there was a bar down by where whatever Talking Stick Arena is, there for a few years was a bar that was basically geared towards the African American community. Would love to learn more about that and that community as well as some of those other marginalized, as well as even some of the small towns around. My friend Brad and I actually, with Glenn Diller, we actually did a project that is sitting on an editor's floor waiting for him to hopefully finish. That was a documentary. We interviewed, I think, 6 people on what it was like to be in Arizona, specifically Phoenix, in the 40s and 50s and 60s. Kind of what was life like? Now, one of the things that I think is interesting is so many people have said, oh, I don't have any good stories. But a lot of times it's not even necessarily that thing that made the headlines. But when we talked to everybody, they said, oh, there are only 2 bars in town, but they each named 2 different bars. So it was a completely different era where you didn't have, there was no newsletter. There was no way to really say, hey, this is what's going on in the community, really until the mid 70s. So everything before that truly is oral history. And the only way to capture that is to find people to tell those stories. Now, Glenn sadly did pass away. But one thing that I think was interesting, and just kind of, how the universe says, you're going down the right path. So about a month ago, I got this random call from a woman who said, I was cleaning out this woman's attic and found a whole stack of this really cool magazine. Oh, let's move further back. Called Progressive Arizona and the Great Southwest. And so we met to go through those. Come to find out, she was Glenn's next door neighbor. So we started talking about that. She is the one who then called and said, oh, sorry to let you know, but Glenn has passed away. But because of that connection, she's like, he had all these photos. Do you want them? And so the family does not want those photos. And so when we interviewed him, he was talking about how they would do these gay picnics up at Oak Green Canyon in the 50s with tablecloths, candelabras. And he said, I have a photo of that. And she said, I think I ran across that photo you're looking for. The last time I was talking to him, I just started throwing out names like George Quaintance. And he was like, well, he never painted me, but he rustled around on his coffee table, pulled up this little 1x2 photo of these 2 Hispanic men in the 50s, one in drag. And he said the little guy in drag was the boyfriend of Quaintance. And so only because the universe was saying, hey, you need to talk to this guy. And so I'm looking forward to getting a chance to go through those photos and see what else is there. Now, because he didn't write anything on them, we have no idea who these people were, or even sometimes who they are, or even where the photo was taken or something. So that's one of the things working with ASU that they've been doing is scanning a lot of images to try and get those up and accessible for crowdsourcing so that we can take a look at this and go through and be like, oh, I know who that is, or oh, that's me, or that's my friend Bob, or that was done at some big beach party they always had at this bar. And so starting to access the community to share those stories, because I know we often look, a lot of the things we're looking for are in people's personal archives. And when folks pass away, a lot of that just winds up going into the garbage and is never seen again. And those stories are just lost for all time. So let me go through and see. Let's see. And so so my friend Wally put up that it would be great to hear from a group of elderly gay and lesbians in Arizona telling their experience of what they thought what progress has been made. That was kind of one of the things that came out of this little documentary that we put together, because I assumed things happened after Stonewall, because we knew there was a ton of bars opening up. but they were talking about how they felt in some ways in the early days, they felt they had it easier. Or there was also the fact there was a man in his mid 80s at that point, um, still wanted to be filmed in silhouette because he didn't want people to find out he was gay at the age of 85. And he's like, I was never gay in Arizona. He was in the military. And he was like, once I crossed the border into California, I was allowed to be a gay man. But in Arizona, I never could. Oh, good. I'm seeing lots of folks loving the idea of a history happy hour. So yeah, no, Harry Hay is a fascinating character. There is biography, which is really good. And it's a lot of fun to read. Wow, just look at all these people. This is great. I love, hey, Donna, how are you doing? Oh, and there's Brian. So yeah, no, I love that there's just so many people here. Oh, right. Yeah. So James from the Arizona Society talks about Chuck King, who was the first Arizona to ever run the Iditarod. Oh, I didn't realize he actually won. And so did a project actually the end of last year, early this year with the Arizona Department of Health, where we actually talked to folks in the HIV/AIDS community and then ran those at Burton Bar Library and talked to a couple of folks that actually one of the guys actually had a jacket from the Iditarod. And so we were going to try and work to get that to ASU. So that way that story will be there. And because they've not set any boundaries in terms of what I can find. So a lot of what my role is with them is to help find things and make sure. Oh, okay. So he won the trial. Okay, so like the pre-race. So someone just said they love my outfit. So does anyone know what artist this t-shirt is representing? So Donna, yes, Cruising Central did become Cruising Seventh. Oh my gosh, and there's Neil. Happy you're here. And so, yeah, I mean, and that was actually one of the things we started finding out with looking at some of the history of the bars. A lot of times they would change names, same location, everything was the same, but just keep going through names for a variety of reasons. And so people refer to it as one thing, even though it may have only been that for a short period of time. So looking at creating a master list so we can start filling in the gaps of bars, kind of their history, addresses, as much information as we can find about the people. Oh, and someone guessed right. Yes, indeed, this is Keith Haring. So Keith Haring was actually, so he was the first graffiti artist to really kind of go mainstream, to make it big. And after opening up Pop Shop in New York, a gallery dedicated to just his art, painting the Berlin Wall. How did he celebrate that? Why, he came to Phoenix, Arizona. They had one of his works of art on display at the art museum, and they brought him in to do a workshop with kids. And as soon as he got here, he noticed that there was no public art. So he said something. And so the city council, the art museum, and South Mountain High School got together and they did this mural that was downtown, which sadly no longer stands, that was probably about 125 feet long by about 12 foot high. And actually what I'll do is I have a video of him painting that, and I will go ahead and post that on the AZ Gay History. So if you want to see that video, go take a look there and you can see Keith painting. Now, one of the things I think that his being here opened so many eyes to murals that some of those folks working on murals today were involved with him then. I've got one friend who actually developed a letter writing friendship because it was before email existed. So even after Keith went to New York, him and this artist kept in touch back and forth. I've got another friend who was actually offered an opportunity to come and move to New York and be kind of Keith Haring's assistant, which he declined. So yeah, so I will do that. So maybe that will entice folks to go and like AZ Gay History, so that way they can see that video, because it is really cool. And then my friend Todd just posted a video that I don't think I had seen since 2012. And so basically you had a group of, there was, you know, when you go into Pride and there are all those haters standing outside of Pride with their signs saying and shouting all kinds of things. So they got the bright idea to do a flash mob in front of that, in front of those folks, to drown them out to Lady Gaga's Born This Way. And so he just put together the video and posted up on YouTube. So I think I shared that, but I will be happy to share it again. And so my friend Rhonda asked, what happened to that mural? No, well, you know, that's the big mystery. It's no longer standing for a variety of reasons. And there's one panel locally that is in the hands of a local artist who was, from my understanding, one of those artists actually with the original painting, because he used about 60 teens from South on High School. But then I also get a random call from Portland, Oregon, from a friend who was like, hey, I was at a party last night and met this guy who says he has 4 panels of the Keith Haring mural. So trying to figure out a way to get to Portland to see them and to get more of the story about how did those 4 panels from Keith Haring wind up in Portland. So would love to see some of those. And I'm not shocked all some of those panels survive, because it would have been such a monumental thing to happen to Phoenix, to have such a world famous artist doing a mural right here. So are there any questions, comments? So I'm glad people like the idea of a history happy hour. And now with this, we could easily do it on a Zoom type thing. So, which I think would be a lot of fun. So yeah, Jody, I'm so glad that some of those panels survived. I'm hoping at some point to actually see them, which would be even better, but I'll get there in time. So I think I have more slides. Let's see, I got to click there. See, there you go. So that is indeed our official logo. So again, so my email is hello@hiphistorian. Also, you can email Pride as well. If you'd like to support the History Project, you can either Venmo me, or I will also post on Arizona Gay History a link that you actually send money to Pride, and it goes and becomes its tax-deductible donation through them that goes directly to the History Project. So that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for hanging out and letting me talk about some history. This is kind of fun. I did one last week talking about some famous women in Arizona. Some of them were lesbians. I didn't even say that, but hopefully I plan on doing something almost on a weekly basis, just trying to get history out there in a variety of different ways. So if you enjoyed this, let me know, reach out to me, and also let me know if there's things you would like to know more about. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hang out here for a little bit and just kind of see what people are saying. Oh, well, you know, this is why I get up in the morning. I mean, I've been doing, so I was working in libraries for about a decade here. With Maricopa County and mainly Phoenix Library. And actually, because I wound up walking away from libraries to pursue doing this full time. So this is pretty much all I do is just dig into the fun of Arizona history. So that's why I'm able to follow so many passions in terms of that LGBTQ history, as well as neon history, looking at some of that signage. I mean, you've got the fact that Casa Grande now has a neon park preserving 10 of those signs from around the state. You've got Ignite Sign Museum. So there's so much fun stuff going on around the state. So I will just say, you know, everyone stay safe, avoid people you don't know, wear your mask. Were there any women's groups during the gay liberation movement? You know, there actually, there was actually, someone just asked, and I was just looking through stuff and found there was a very brief magazine, I want to say from Southern Arizona. And so now I've never seen a copy. I was able to find through like University of Michigan. I found, I think, a cover of one of the magazines. So when you talk about like the Matching Society, the sister of that would also have been Sisters of Bilitis, which was kind of the spearheaded by another librarian. So many of you may not know, but libraries were the first national organization to have an LGBT component. Back then it was, and actually it's still called the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Roundtable. They've added some letters since then, but it was the first national organization. And I'm blanking on her name only because she was actually one of the founders of that and was a very strong, back in Boston, you had the Sisters of Bilitis doing things out there as well. So, all right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Please like Arizona Gay History and look forward to sharing more information with you. And if you have anything to share, please do so.